afternoon. No. As I mentioned last night, on Friday, 2 people will be, what we say, receiving the precepts. So I thought I would talk today and another day a little bit about what the precepts are, what that means to receive them, and what is that all about. I've done this before. A few years ago when some people were receiving precepts in the summertime, the whole week, each day, I addressed different precepts and different aspects of it, and we had the recorder, and everyone loved the talks and wanted to have them because there was so much information. And then when they went to download the talks, the recorder hadn't worked all week. So, maybe that will happen again. Maybe not. At the same time, every time is different, so I certainly won't say the same thing that I have said before. And even if I did, you would receive it differently. And there are people who are here who have never heard this before. Even if we have been here before and I have said the same thing, sometimes we don't hear it. I tell a story often about my teacher and Korean sensei's teacher. One day she gave this, I've been practicing with her for a number of years, and she gave this great talk about compassion. And after her talk, I said to her, that was really great. You really should talk about compassion more. And she said, I've been talking about compassion for years. Well, I didn't hear it. And that's how it works. So every time you hear something that you didn't hear before, I say something that I didn't say before. Even if I say the same thing, you hear it differently. Sometimes I don't know I said it before. Everything changes, right? Which leads us to the precepts. We can see what we call the precepts, and in our practice there are 16, divided into 3 parts. So there are the Big Ten. In American sports, that's a group of universities called the Big Ten. It's big schools that play football against each other. Although now it's the Big 12. But, the Big Ten, we haven't added 2 to that in our precepts. You've heard these before, I vow to refrain from killing, stealing, saying bad things about other people, basic, what we could call ethical guidelines. That's a way that we can see them, as seeing them as ethical guidelines. Before we come to those Big Ten, we have 2 sets of 3. I will come back to this, but I'm just giving you a basic look. What we call the 3 treasures, and then what we call the 3 pure precepts. I'll come back to this just to give you a brief view. So what are these precepts? As I said, we can see it as ethics. Don't do this, do that. We can see them from this literal point of view in which there are things you do and things you don't do. And so if it's about killing, well, you don't kill. And it's very clear what killing means, and you don't do it. Right? However, there's another aspect. There's another way of seeing these precepts, which are that these are just basic aspects of reality. They're not rules, guidelines. It's just what reality is. And from this perspective, there are no differences. There is no killing or not killing. There is no black and white. There are no nuances. There's no right and wrong. This is the perfect way, as we say, or this is the absolute view, as we say. If we stick to just the first literal perspective, we'll run into trouble, because then we become fundamentalist. We become dogmatic. We don't make any exceptions. We beat ourselves up and we beat other people up. We don't see the other aspect, which is the oneness of life. We see only the differences. We don't see the oneness, that we are the other. But if we see only that aspect, we get into trouble as well. Because then anything goes. We don't recognize that there are things we don't do. If you're a parent, you know there are things you don't talk about with the child. The child wouldn't understand it. There are adults and there are children. So there are different things. There's different worlds. There's different functioning according to the situation. If we stick to one or the other of these two extremes, I will say extremes, we open ourselves up to a number of abuses. In fact, innumerable abuses. Which is where the third perspective comes in of approaching these precepts, which is the subjective view. There are differences, and yet everything is one. So it all depends on the situation. Sometimes we do this, other times we do that. It depends. So we often give this. Well, actually, we could give a different example, which is current events. And we see the trouble that our world, at least in Europe, we've gotten ourselves into with focusing so much on the differences. It might be with refugees and traditional values in European countries. It might be with fundamentalists in various religious sects. It could be Jewish, it could be Muslim, it could be Christian, it could be Buddhist. The Buddhists are not exempt from this, fundamentalism. So take one incident. You probably all heard of this. Last week in a church in France, these two guys came in and they killed the priest. And when they came out of the church, the police killed them. So we can say, okay, well, everybody was killing, and you're not supposed to kill, right? So if we just stick to the literal perspective, do not kill. Or we could say, just from the absolute perspective, there is no killing or not killing, so we just do whatever we want. We get into trouble. So what's the difference between or is there a difference between the two men who came into the church, put the priest on his knees and slit his throat, and the policeman who killed the two men when they came out of the church? Is there a difference? I think we all sense that there is a difference between the two situations. And yet the act of killing is present in both. I'm just giving this as an example, a concrete example where we see clearly that if we stick to any of the perspectives, we'll be caught in a mess, right? And actually the mess that we are dealing with is created by sticking to positions. So the guys who go into the church and slit the priest's throat are really fixed on a position and not seeing the oneness of life. We won't get into all of that, because this is a whole, can of worms. But just from that one perspective, they're not seeing the wholeness of life, the oneness of life, if you do that. We could say that the policemen maybe aren't seeing the oneness of life either. However, they're acting in a situation where, in order to save other lives, they were under the impression that these guys had suicide bomb vests and other weapons, and were fearing that they would kill other people. There's a famous story in a more esoteric tradition of Zen where, in a previous lifetime, the person who was the historic Buddha, supposedly, in this story, was in a situation where there was a murderer threatening other people. And so he killed the murderer because it would save others' lives. So, when we approach these precepts from that point of view, then it depends on the situation. At the same time, I heard or read somewhere, I think I read it somewhere, that Maizumi Roshi, who was the founder of our lineage in the West, in California, used to say that if we maintained the first precept, which is, I vow to refrain from killing, which is another way of saying to see the oneness of life. If we maintain just that precept, all of them are maintained. If we see just that, just the oneness of life, we will maintain all of the precepts. Because they all, what we say, violation arises from not being one with, or not experiencing the oneness of. I hesitate even to talk about violation, but it's just a way of clearly, it's a way of communicating what we're talking about, let's say. Because simply by living, we are violating the precepts. That statue on the altar does not violate the precepts. It's not alive. It doesn't uphold them either. It doesn't maintain the precepts either, but it doesn't violate them. It's not alive. By living, we are violating the precepts. There's killing going on in our body by living. In order to live, we have to kill. At the same time, how then do we live in the best way possible to, what we say, atone for? And there is not a satisfactory word for atonement in French or Portuguese, as far as I know. In German, I don't know. What would you say? Doesn't work very well either? No. It always comes out sounding kind of religious or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in German too. Whereas in English we have, it's very fortunate because the word atone, if you divide it up, it says at one. So you put at and one, and you have at one. If you put them together, you have atone. So atoning for means to be at one with, which means to fully acknowledge whatever it is. In the morning when I walk around and acknowledge you and give you a morning greeting, we chant this we call it the verse of atonement. It's terrible in French. It's called the verset de repentir or something, isn't it? What was that? What we say in French? Oui. And repentir sounds like you're bad. It's something bad. At least to me, and I'm not a native speaker, so I don't know. Whereas atonement is you are acknowledging whatever it is. Okay, I got angry at that person. I'm acknowledging it. And one of our precepts is to refrain from becoming angry. Okay, I became angry. I atoned for that by acknowledging it. I can even say I will inquire into it, examine it, and act from a space of that, of bearing witness to it, not having a judgment about it, and acting from that. That might be apologizing. It might not. It might be just changing the way that then I'm dealing with the person with whom I became angry. I don't know. We have no way of knowing what that action will be. Which is the key to everything as well, not knowing. We enter the moment not knowing what will arise, what the circumstances will be, who the people will be there, what presents itself at any moment. We can assume that the policeman who killed the 2 terrorists, they didn't know what would happen, probably. They probably had a good idea that something was going to arise that they had to be very attentive to and use their training, apply their training to. However, they had no idea what would happen. Maybe what they shouldn't have done what they did. Who knows? It's what happened, happened. They have to atone for that, however, whatever it was. Every moment we atone for whatever arises by acknowledging the oneness of life and who I am. I am the oneness of life. I am this. Or you are that, which is my Dharma name, right? So, that's a little overview. So the question then is, what is this, when we say people receive the precepts, what is this about? What does that mean? Because this practice that we are all doing is about our desire, let's say, how can we phrase this? Our desire to experience things as they are. We have many different ways of expressing it. We all came here for different reasons, like I said. But until we have experienced the nature of things, principally this, we will continue to be separated and from the others, from the situation, because we will be focusing on an illusion. We will be focusing on me as different from you. And therefore, we will cause suffering for ourselves and others. By coming and sitting on the cushion, like we do here, for those moments that we're sitting there on the cushion, we are not acting on, at least, of course we're acting on it within ourselves, but we are not acting on a lot of the things we usually act upon. We are not putting into practice, as it were, our deluded view of things. Of course, we're still doing it within ourselves. But we're taking a step back. We're sitting here and we're saying, okay, I will just see what arises and let it be. We do this to differing degrees. We are able to do this to differing degrees. But you will see, day after day here, something will change. You won't be aware of it probably. It's very subtle. But by the end of the week, you won't have the same experience on your cushion and in the world as you had at the beginning of the week. I can't tell you what it will be, but there will be something different. Because everything is different all the time, and everything is different given what has occurred in the previous moment. Everything changes all the time. So, if that is what we are all trying to do, this is our inspiration for all of us sitting here, why do some people, we say, receive the precepts? If we are all doing the same practice, why do some people receive the precepts? It's a choice that they make, right? It doesn't make them different, special. There's no selection. It's whoever requests it, discusses it with me, and we see how it goes. By making that step, whether they verbalize it in this way or not, this is the way that I experience it. Yeah, and I would say on my own path, this is how I experienced it too, and I experience it for the others who practice with me. They are acknowledging at that moment that the awakened way, let's say, that their nature is awakened, that there is an awakening. That's not what they're experiencing, but they acknowledge that their basic nature is that. They don't necessarily have that experience, but they acknowledge that that's how it is. And that they want to live, they want to cultivate and be inspired by that and work towards actualizing their life according to that awakened nature. And by receiving these precepts is the way that we do that. It gives us guidelines, as I said, by which to live within that awakened sphere of life, whether at any given moment we're aware of it or not. We use these as kind of, in French we say garde-fou. Is that what I mean? By guidelines or reminders, something to come back to see, oh, okay, well, in this situation, what am I doing here? So we could say, which was my own personal position, okay, well, if I'm already that, I'm already devoted to this practice, I'm devoted to this teacher, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do the ceremony. I don't need to have something hanging around my neck. It's already that. It's true. But there's a difference. Eventually what happened to me was I became, instead of why should I do it, it was why shouldn't I do it? Well, why not? If that's how it is already, well, why not then? Something changes. It's like people who, any sort of ritual that you go through, or any commitment that you make, something changes when you do that. In your life. It's not about making a commitment to me, to your teacher, or to the other people in the Sangha, or even to your family or something. It's a commitment to yourself. It's about your practice and your way. And something changes when you do that. You may be more more or less aware of it. I don't know everyone. There are a few people here who have done it. I'm not sure how they would verbalize it, but there is something that changes. And part of it has to do with the same thing that happens with all ritual and all ceremony. Ritual is collective and impersonal. So it's very powerful in this ritual in particular, this ceremony in particular, to have all of your peers with you, supporting you, participating with you in the ceremony, because everyone participates. Everyone is joining collectively in this impersonal ritual. All of the rituals are impersonal. They focus on the impersonal aspect of being. Everyone does the same thing. Or tries to. In any case, even if we don't, in the Oryoki, for example, even if, okay, you learned it and then you do it the first time, you maybe don't put the spoon in the right place or fold the cloth the right way or follow exactly the chanting. But the simple fact of sitting there doing it, you are already stepping out of your personal way of doing things. You're accepting to let go of your way, how you think it should be done, and acknowledging that, okay, I can let that go and I will join with the others. It's a way of becoming one with the group, with the others. So when we do this precept ceremony, those who are receiving the precepts are expanding their vow beyond just their little life, as it were, and acknowledging it publicly, which changes something as well. Sometimes we don't say things out loud because we don't really want to acknowledge it. And there's enormous power in the power of speech. We can see this in talk therapy. It's incredibly powerful to say things. You may have been saying it to yourself somehow all your life, but to say it in the presence of a witness who is impartial is incredibly powerful and liberating and healing. The same thing applies with ritual. It's not necessarily that it's healing. It could be. I don't know. Or liberating, but it could be. But something happens when it's almost an alchemy. Something happens when you present it to the others. You're actually presenting it to yourself. The others are there as a support and a container to receive it for you as well. At the same time, the precepts are transmitted, we say, by the preceptor, the person who is officiating your ceremony. In this case, this week it will be me. When Corinne Sensei does it, it's her. When my teacher did it, it was her. And actually, Corinne Sensei and I received the precepts together, the same ceremony, with 5 other people. So there were 7 of us receiving it. So that also is important, that these precepts are transmitted by this teacher. And this teacher is not who you think she is. This teacher is the lineage. And these precepts are coming through the lineage. 83 generations of us to you. That's quite a statement, right? It makes no sense, absolutely, right? It doesn't. It's like these 83 generations back to the original Buddha. What are you talking about? But we can concretely see that I was there when it came from my teacher, and so was she. So we know that happened. And our teacher was there when it happened with her teacher, so she knows that happened. Those of you who have done it with me were there when it happened, so you know that happened. And it goes like that. Those of you who received precepts from Korin Sensei, you were there and you know that happened. However, when we begin the ceremony, we don't know anything. So, none of us know what will happen on Friday at that ceremony. And when the preceptor sits there and begins the ceremony, she or he has summoned the lineage before that and invited them all to become present, to be present here. And they are. They're present in the incarnation of the preceptor, is one way of seeing it. For that, the preceptor, like the one who's receiving the precepts, has to, the personal aspect of the preceptor has to get out of the way. So Amy has to get out of there. We don't want her there. She has no place there. Because she would just clog everything up and would inhibit the transmission of the precepts. The person who's receiving the precepts, there's something similar that happens. They have to empty themselves of themselves in order to receive this, what is being transmitted. You don't necessarily think about it in that way. And also, the witnesses, the other participants, something like that happens for you too. You let go of your fixed ideas about what's going on. If you can do that and open to it, something happens. You will feel something other than if you sit there with your judgments and say, oh, this is stupid, what is this? I don't dare say that, or how can that person do that, or whatever. You know. This is why we say receiving, because there's something that's transmitted and we receive them. We receive it. I just want to look at my notes here quickly, just be sure I don't forget anything as we're going along. Oh yeah, right, I didn't talk about that. In Japanese we call this jukai, and you've probably heard us saying that. We call it, have you done your jukai, or have you? And it's the ceremony in Japanese, that's the word for it, of formally receiving the precepts, right? So it's a ceremony that we will do on Friday. And so we break that word up in Japanese, because that's how words are made in Japanese. Ju means to, from my understanding, is at the same time to receive and to transmit. So it applies to the preceptor and to the recipient. And then kai is to awaken. So we could say that, I think this was Bodhidharma who said this. And I have written by it Bodhidharma, so it must have come from his thing. So receiving the kai, So jukai, to receive the kai, which is to awaken, means to become awakened to your true nature. That's what I said before. It doesn't mean, because some people say, well, I'm not awakened to my true nature, so I can't do this. What we're doing is acknowledging that's what our aspiration is. And in a more absolute sense, that's what it is. It's not just our aspiration, but that's what it is. It's something that can't be understood mentally, intellectually. Can only be experienced. Okay. So this, if we go back to what I said about the awakening to your true nature, if you awaken to your true nature, you are living according to the truth of things as they are, not according to how they should be or should not be, or how you should be or should not be. That's where it's, when we talk about these precepts, they're not should and should not. They're based on the true nature of things. And if we awaken to that nature, then there's no problem. Of course, that's not permanent. Like Suzuki Roshi used to say to his students, a student, I guess, asked a question, something like, so, when you become enlightened, something to the effect of, it's forever and ever. And Suzuki Roshi said, you're very funny. You accept that everything is impermanent except enlightenment. The nature of all things is impermanent. So even this, I've awakened, let's say, is impermanent. The next minute, it's all cloudy again, and you don't know. This is our life. It's like with the breathing. When you do a breathing practice, you sit there and you try to stay with your breath, and then you lose track of it, and then you come back, you come back, and you lose track of it, and then you come back, and you come back, and you come back. Even the in and out of the breath is a perfect manifestation of the nature of life. You don't just take that breath and everything's great. The blood's all oxygenated, whatever. Everything's cool, great. Took in that oxygen, that's it. No. You have to let it go. You have to let it out. And then there's another one. Endless cycle of in and out, in and out, in and out. And it's the same with, I see it, I don't see it. I see it, I don't see it. I see it, I don't see it. However, when you become more and more aware of that, then you're seeing it. It sounds pretty Zen, but it's true. That's acknowledging things as they are. Okay? So when the idea of the precepts is that we are living our lives from that perspective, as it were, from that view, rather than from the diluted view, which is where we most of the time live our lives, of wanting something that we don't have, of wanting to be someone who we are not, of wanting other people to be something that they are not, of wanting to get people out of the way, of beating ourselves up, wanting to be smart and we're not, or thinking that we're not smart and we are. Endless. Okay? That's the deluded way of living, to not see things as they are. So, that's a lot of information. Any questions or comments or participations about this? If anyone wants to share their experience of when they went through the ritual themselves, or if you have a question about it or something.
Maybe I can ask, but maybe more share something. Because I used to hear that we are responsible for our actions, but not for our feelings or thoughts. They arise and we just acknowledge them. But then we can choose to act upon them or not. But I think what you are saying and what Buddhism says is that another level is also to be responsible for our thoughts, feelings, and to also exert some direction on them, even though they can and they will arise despite of all we want, and then we have to atone for them as they are. But at the same time, there is also a responsibility in the way we think. For example, criticizing others or ourselves, and to feed that or to be aware that it's happening and not wanting to go on.
A couple of things. We might have to define the word responsible, but we don't necessarily have to at this moment. I guess I would use the word acknowledgement, to acknowledge that this is what's happening at this moment. And that I am, I'm not sure how you define responsible, but it's mine. I am that. So it's not someone else who is making me think that or feel that. It's not the other's fault. One of our precepts also is not blaming. In that sense, to take responsibility for it, yes, it's I am that. It's not to be identified with it. It's that it's not outside of me, and that I have to, that someone else can solve it for me, or I can distance myself from it. It's not really anything about me. By acknowledging, it's not, the goal is not to change it, or direct our thoughts or emotions. It's just to become aware of and acknowledge. And by doing that, we are atoning for it. There's nothing, it's not like we have to, you might have some sort of ritual about atonement. There are things that we can do. But let's say what's the key is to acknowledge, to be aware of and acknowledge, without judgment about, if it's good or bad, or it's just what it is. Does that?
So, it was too present in me, maybe the judgment.
Possibly.
Not being good to think or to feed some critical thoughts or chatting about other people.
Possibly. Maybe. And maybe in the responsibility there's tied then a notion of guilt or blame. I'm responsible, so I'm so, I feel bad because I shouldn't have done that, or guilty, or something about guilt and blame, maybe, the responsibility. I'm not sure. But.
Can I share what I feel about with my jukai?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I decided to make the jukai, I asked myself why I'm doing the jukai.
Maybe talk a little louder.
And because I ask myself, is it for me? Is it because I'm doing the jukai because I like very much Amy? What is it all about? And because we have certain tendencies to have a teacher like love or something. And when I decided to do it, is because I was aware of, no, it's not about me, it's not about my relationship, because it's important too. It's because I want to go this path, whatever Roshi is not or not present or present or not present, because if you were no longer living, I was doing the same thing, sitting and going through this way. So my commitment was with the way, the practice. Wherever I was, to be in another country, but I was aware of my practice. That was my commitment. Unfortunately, I have Roshi having my support, and I was a fortunate one. And when I was realizing that, I'm sure that I want to do my shukai. And fortunately, in the ceremony, was very similar to my marriage. Of my day of my marriage, it was a very beautiful day. But was at some point Christina was not there, because unfortunately I was Claudia and Juan helping me, because so many vows. I do it and was not there, Christina. They were helping somehow. At some point I knowledge that Claudia was here and Juan was here, and they were helping. I didn't know it because I vow. And that was my experience. The commitment with practice, with the way of living this kind of, and spread to the others, because then I have fortunately I have the possibility to have a group in the Symposium to allow others come practice with me and say, okay, come, this is very beautiful, sit all together. That was my commitment, and it was very beautiful, because it was kind of impersonal. It was not about my ego, what I am. I want to show everyone this kind of things, but the commitment with the practice.
Thank you.
I asked a question one day about the precepts to my teacher. I'd like you to ask the same question. It's and also about something that Geno Roshi told me one day. I think that was one of the very first Taisans I had with her. She said, Jin, the difference between Christians and Buddhists is that Buddhists think that a man is born good. Good.
Born good.
Yeah. And it's really, that's the core question for me is, so the question I asked my teacher was, is something that you do in a state of non-separation, is it ethical? Is it good?
The question is something that you do in a state of non-separation?
Yeah, of oneness.
So what do you mean by state of oneness?
Something that I think I do in just without thinking, just from my impulse.
Can you give me an example?
well, I can get angry and it just, something comes out of, a word comes out of my mouth, just can't help it.
Mm-hmm.
Or just protecting someone or things like that. And this movement of, let's take the example of my anger. It's something that I might regret. It may have good or bad consequences, but it seems to me that I did it from the whole body.
Mm-hmm.
Just.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's different ways of approaching it. I hear this question of good or bad consequences. In fact, there are no good or bad consequences. There are just consequences of any action. There are consequences. And so even the notion of is it ethical or not is coming from a perspective of is it good or bad? Or is it right or wrong? I think. I'm not sure. And the notion of, a state of oneness or a situation of oneness or not is also, we're getting into a lot of dualistic positions here. If we can just I'm assuming that what you mean by just acting in the moment, that you're meaning that it's not coming from your personal, this is how I want things to be situation? Is that? Yeah, something like that? In that sense, we have to see what arises. We don't know. It will probably be different, however, than if you were coming from the position of me, I want it this way, and I'm going to yell at that person because they're not behaving how I want them to behave. It's not necessarily that it's a good consequence or a bad consequence, it's just different than if you're coming from a place of not attachment to me. And the other may receive it differently as well, because that may be part of the consequence. The other might receive it in the same way. But then you, when you pursue the situation with the person, will act differently than if you had been coming from me, my fixed position of I want it this way. Are you following me?
Yeah.
It comes back to, though, this notion of judging the situation, saying, okay, is this good consequence or bad consequence? There are no good consequences or bad consequences. It's just different. Of course, this is the absolute point of view I'm giving you. But it's informed by the literal point of view, which is good and bad. So, would I like to avoid hurting someone? Yes, I would. When I become angry with someone, am I hurting them? Maybe. But if I take the whole into consideration, I might think of it as a necessary evil, as we say, as a compassionate action. Norman Fisher says compassion is going towards suffering instead of away from it. So a compassionate action is something that is arising from this acknowledgement that there is something, a suffering of some kind, and that's a vast category, suffering, and acting from that. It could mean anger with a child. Sometimes we have to scold them as a compassionate action. And the consequences will be different than if I am attached to me and how I want things and scolding that child and berating them and judging them or something. Are you following this? Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm curious to know what she said. I'm sure it was a different context, but
First, I must say I don't remember what I asked.
oh, okay.
I don't remember at all. I hardly ever remember what I say in those cases. But if you allow me, I would like to add something that just popped up when you said this about Norman Fisher. You know, compassion is going towards suffering. Towards, I would like even to say towards the pain.
Yeah.
What I would like to add, it speaks to me a lot, what you just said. It includes my own pain. And this is why what I would add to what you said, I totally agree with what you said, is what I think where as Amy Roshi has been talking all the time, that the awareness goes very much to that place to see if I am protecting myself from pain. If whatever I do, whatever, like you said, Jean, the impulse that comes, we can never be sure if an impulse that we have comes of our automatic structure, of conditioning, of our conditioning, or if it's really what you try to explain, the oneness of the moment, the impersonal moment. And I think that really the difference that we can when we want to check where did this come from, it's Zen Roshi, our teacher, who over and over would tell us, look who you are protecting, who or what you are protecting. And if I find a movement within myself that I whatever I did, whatever I said, whatever I thought was coming from a place where I find out that I was trying to protect myself from pain and from suffering, then I know I was not in non-separation. And so I like very much what you just said. Compassion is going towards suffering and towards pain, including my own.
Exactly.
And that's the very, very important part of it. If I can do that, then the consequences, I'm now going to say something very provocative. The consequences are always going to be prosperous, even if they don't look good. But they are going to be prosperous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
The question about hierarchies. It's possible to become a sensei or a Roshi without taking the precepts?
Maybe. I don't think in our lineage it is. No. I don't think so.
No, in our lineage.
In our lineage.
In our lineage, I know nobody.
No.
Yeah.
No. But it might be elsewhere, I don't know.
So it's like a kind of path, let's say.
Not one like that.
No, yeah, not like that. I wouldn't say that. Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that you take the precepts because that's what your goal is. It's just that in order to be sitting here in this position, you have to acknowledge everything. You have to have acknowledged everything you acknowledged by taking the precepts. It's just not. You couldn't be sitting here otherwise. At least in our lineage, I would say. I can't say that in others.
I have a question regarding the previous subject. When you say going towards suffering or pain, and you want to be compassionate, you have to be compassionate first with yourself. So where is the limit? How do you know? I'm sorry. I can't see the limit where I have to start. I'm sorry. I wasn't clear.
Well, we can try again.
How can you be compassionate with others if you can't be with yourself first?
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah,
And how?
it has to start with you. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is not easy. That's almost the most difficult part.
Okay.
Is starting with yourself.
Okay.
Elle a demandé comment on peut avoir de la compassion pour les autres si on n'en a pas d'abord avec soi. Et j'ai dit non, il faut commencer là. And when we can do that here, the natural outgrowth is towards others. It's not. It's actually not two actions,
Okay.
but it does originate here. It's like the Dalai Lama says, world disarmament cannot happen until each of us has disarmed ourselves. But as soon as we disarm ourselves, then it happens. And the same thing is, it's the same movement, I would say.